Joining us now here in the studio is Martin Friedland. He is a professor of law emeritus at the University of Toronto and has written a glorious book, the second edition of which is out now, called The University of Toronto, A History, and we're happy to have you here at TVO.
Pleasure to be here.
To write a history of the country's biggest university, which is actually made up, of course, of all of these different federated colleges within it, Victoria, Trinity, UniversityCollege, and so on and so forth, that is a daunting task. So take us back a decade when you put out the first edition of this book and answer the question of why you wanted to do this in the first place.
Well, I didn't want to do it. I was busy doing my academic work at the Faculty of Law, and somebody called from the University of Toronto Press saying the committee would like me to submit an application, and I was just about to close to retirement at that point, and I said, well, I'll look into it, and I explored it for at least a month to 2 months as to whether it was doable. Could you do it in one volume? Was there enough material to do it? Would it be intellectually interesting? And I concluded that it would be a perfect retirement project. And to my surprise, I completed it in the time allotted. They wanted it out for the 175th anniversary in 2002.
Somehow you managed to find 750 pages of material to write about, so I guess there was enough there.
The archives are just filled with material. There were autobiographies and biographies and loads of theses and documents. The problem is that there was too much material. Many universities have histories, and they go on into 2 volumes, even 3 volumes. The university wanted a 1 volume, and that actually made it more interesting. You had to be selective. So I picked the incidents that I felt were turning points and wrote about them, and I did it chronologically, which was one way of doing it. Sometimes people do it in terms of subject areas. I thought doing it chronologically, not by presidents, but by events. That would make it a more interesting book, because I wanted people to read it from the beginning to the end. Now, not that many did, but some did.
More will after this, I suspect.
Well, I hope so.
How many years have you been affiliated in some fashion with the University of Toronto?
I started as a student in 1951. I went to UniversityCollege as an undergraduate, then to the law school, went off to do my graduate work at Cambridge, taught at Osgoode Hall Law School, and came back to the university in 1965.
And you're still there?
I'm still there. I still have my office, and I still teach a course, and I like the University of Toronto. But that raises an issue. When does the history of the university stop? And many people stop at a point where the archival records stop. Some stop because they were involved in it. Now, if I had taken the latter course, as some suggested, I would have stopped the history in 1951, because I knew, as a student leader on the campus, I knew Sidney Smith. I worked with Claude Bissell the following decade, and on and on. Some of my professors were in the First World War. So
well, you couldn't stop it halfway through the 20th century.
So I went up to the year 2000, the end of Rob Pritchard's presidency. The university was in good shape at that point, and I wanted it to end on a happy note.
We are going to look at several pictures that will help us tell the story of the history of the university, but before we do that, I want to ask you one more question. Given your about a half a century of affiliation with the U of T, do you see this university as having had a particular mission that makes it distinctive from other post-secondary institutions?
Its mission was to be a top-flight university competing with the best universities in the world. And over the years, and you can trace the development, and perhaps in the pictures that you're going to show me, we'll see where the important figures there, such that as we speak, in the two most important world surveys, the University of Toronto is within the top 20 universities in the world. And the gap between Toronto and other universities in many of these surveys is widening. So it's recognized as a very strong, important university, and that was always the mission of those that were interested in developing the university.
Okay, let's go through the pictures now. We're going to start to tell the story. The first picture is of King's College from 1886. And what is the significance of King's College as it relates to the kind of beginnings and development of the U of T?
Well, that picture is of the residents of King's College. King's College was founded by Bishop Strawn, and it was an Anglican college in 1827. But because of religious conflicts in the province, is that the state religion? Should it get the land grants? It didn't actually start until 1843. And this is the first building that was built. It was a residence, and it's actually built, you'll be interested in this, on the site of the present legislative buildings of Ontario.
That's where Queen's Park is today.
That is where Queen's Park is.
Which, U of T owns the land under Queen's Park.
I'm not sure. I'm sure they've given that up.
No, they don't. They still have it. It's a lease. It's a 99-year lease.
Well, maybe we could take it back. But then, if you remember your history, with the United Provinces, the provincial capital was going to be was in Montreal, and then it was going to move to Toronto. So the province, the United Provinces, wanted that site for the legislative buildings. It never moved to Toronto, it moved to Ottawa. And that building became a women's lunatic asylum, with quotes around
Supply your own punchline, right?
Right.
As in?
Actually, it was called the University Women's Lunatic Asylum. The story is complicated because when Baldwin became the Premier, Prime Minister of the United Provinces, he wanted to remove the Anglican connection. Bishop Strawn was very unhappy with that, but the University of Toronto was founded then in about 1850. Bishop Strawn went off to found Trinity College, which is now the site of Trinity Bellwoods Park. I mean, so, and every time I pass there, my daughter and her kids play there. I think of Bishop Strawn founding his own college.
Nice. Well, that's one big name. There are, as you drive down St. George Street, for example, you'll see lots of names on lots of buildings, and one of the names is Daniel Wilson. There's a men's residence at UC named after this guy, Daniel Wilson. Who was he?
He was actually a very important professor. He was the professor of anthropology, English. He had about 6 subjects, and he became the second president of the University of Toronto. The person who had been the president of King's College, McCall, was the first president.
Is the McCall Street named after him?
Exactly. It's a pretty minor street because he wasn't that good a president. This president, got an important University College residence named after him.
University College is our next picture from 1857. And again, maybe you could talk about how these were all independent universities on their own or colleges on their own that somehow came together to form U of T.
Well, this was the original college, teaching college. And it was the provincial college, and it had the land grants. So this magnificent college was put outside the city in the 1850s. Now, all the other religious bodies that had their own colleges, Queens, Victoria, these were denominational colleges. They wanted the land grants. They wanted the endowment. And those that supported University College wanted to use up all the money as best they could in putting up this magnificent college, which, by the way, made the list last year of one of the 10 best, most beautiful universities, not just the college, the University of Toronto, but they show this picture of University College. It was number 6. I have a bit of a conflict of interest. It was on this, but it was 1 ahead of Cambridge, and we know that Cambridge is a beautiful college.
Indeed. Well, speaking of conflicts of interest, I have one on this whole thing. I'm a graduate of Victoria College, and the next picture we're going to show is of Annesley Hall, which at the time, this is I guess the southeast corner of University Avenue and Bloor Street. How much of what we see there today, because Annesley Hall's still there, how much of what we see there today is still original to this picture?
I think all of it. I'm sure it's been renovated and air conditioned.
But it looks the same pretty much, doesn't it?
It would look exactly like
not the horses and carriages, but
and there's a bus stop which I often stood at just in front of it, and my wife picks me up right there. So it looks exactly the same.
Huh. Speaking of looking the same, the next picture I think is also gorgeous. And again, full disclosure here, this is a building that I spent a few years taking classes in. That's Old Vic, the gorgeous old Gothic building on the campus of Victoria University. And how did Victoria College, University, call it what you will, how did it end up joining the U of T?
Well, it didn't want to join the University of Toronto at first, but it became very difficult for it to afford science labs and scientific equipment. And so in the 1880s, it was given land and federated with the university. St. Mike's had already federated. Trinity would come much later. It didn't come until about 1904. But it's interesting, when it came, it wanted to keep the subjects it was teaching, the humanities. It didn't teach the social sciences, so they became university departments. It didn't teach sciences, or didn't want to, so they became university departments. And that's why English and many of those subjects, ancient history, some parts of philosophy, were college subjects, but others were university subjects.
Gotcha. Here's our next picture, which is of University College in 1890 after a fire. How much of UC today is not this, because the fire destroyed so much of it?
It's those blocks of stone are still there.
They're original.
It was rebuilt. The interior, the wood burned. Not everything. In the far west part, there's a window there that's still the original window. But they improved the look of it, and they made these magnificent East Hall and West Hall. University College is about to change some of the structure of it to bring more students back into the colleges. That's been a problem over the years. How do you break the university down into groups? You say you were at Victoria College, but you probably didn't spend as much time there as you did in other parts of the university, would be my guess. Is that?
I think that's right. I mean, you had, back when I went, you had 1 or 2 classes at Vic, but then all over the place, really.
But now, you'll be proud to know that one of the most important changes in the university over the last 10 years, since the book was written, but I discussed this in the new introduction, is what is called the Vic One Program. The Vic One Program gives students a real identity with the college. They have 40% of their time in a specialized program, and that's spread to all of the colleges now, so that a large number of first-year students have 1 or more of their subjects in a very small group. So it breaks down the anonymity of this very large university. So it's one of the most important developments, and I think Vic has to take credit for it. There's a program on Northrop Frye. Trinity has one on naturally international relations. University College has on gender studies. Woodsworth College has one is developing one on criminology.
I wonder, Sheldon, if we can show these next 2 pictures sequentially. So we have a class here, a biology lab in 1924, and then the next picture, if we flip over to that, is a woman named Madeline Fritz, who was a student, a female geology student, back at the turn of the last century. This is in the 1920s when, I mean, there surely could not have been very many female geology students back then.
No, but I also have a picture of 6 or 8 flappers in the front campus, and I give a full pages to that, but that was an intriguing picture of Madeline Fritz. Women came to the university in the 1880s, the first women, and it was a major controversy. Should they be integrated into the university, or should they have their own college? As we know, many American universities had a women's college, but the government of the time, the Ontario government, wanted full integration. They didn't want to build another building for women.
But that lab was women only. That lab shot we just saw.
But that's the same thinking. It would have been indelicate for, they may have been, certainly for anatomy and things like that, you wouldn't want men and women together. But I'm not sure, it was a pretty liberal time in the 20s, so maybe for that picture they were there. I'm not sure that they were.
What do you think of the trend, which is the case now, where men and women share residences, share bathrooms? There's nothing separated by gender anymore at all, it seems.
Fair enough, but that was slow in coming, those changes. But now, as you know, well over half the students at the University of Toronto, and this is true across North America, are women, and in some courses, law, for example, there are more women than men. In medicine, for some time, I believe there have been more women than men. In some, it's growing in engineering, particularly chemical engineering. So I think the barriers have been broken, and certainly the glass ceiling has been broken, that we find that the Dean of Medicine is a woman, The Dean of Law is a woman. The Dean of Engineering is a woman. The Provost was a woman, and the new Provost is a woman.
Never had a female president, though.
No. McGill has, and many other, and Edmonton, Alberta has. But that's actually important, because what we see in the research areas in the university is talk of collaboration, and I speculate particularly in the introduction, whether the appearance of these senior academic leaders being female has influenced the cooperative approach to research and development rather than struggling to do it yourself. And that may be one of the reasons why the university has been doing well.
Here's a picture we're going to show now that you would just never, ever see today. That's a Sopwith Camel, World War I vintage, on the front lawn of University College in 1918. What's that plane doing there?
Well, it wasn't taking off or landing. I think it was there for publicity purposes, but we were training British flyers, Canadian flyers, American flyers. Many Americans came up and then to get their flying credentials at the University of Toronto.
But I guess the point is, if you were a student at U of T between 1914 and 1918, you stood a decent chance of going off to fight in war.
For sure.
Well, that's not the case today.
Every issue of the monthly bulletin would list the names. I have in the book the numbers, the monthly totals for University College, and they might be 14 students in that 1 year died in Somme or Ypres, and it was devastating. The women, in fact, in those years, took more of the positions on campus in terms of students than men.
And fast forward a couple of more decades, and here we have a picture of a tank once again in front of University College on the campus of the University of Toronto.
Right.
And again, even in World War II, you would have gone off to war if you had a shot of going off to war.
Not to the same extent.
Not to the same extent.
And the numbers of the First World War were devastating. But still, when I go through Under Soldiers Tower besides Hart House, and you look at those names, and because I tell the stories of some of the people, a Second World War secret agent who could have been a brilliant academic and was captured, tortured, and died. I have a paragraph on him, and it brings tears to my eyes whenever I go by. The sacrifices that were made.
Kids.
He was 21 at that point when he died.
U of T, of course, is very well known over the years for its, if I can put it this way, superstar professors. And we're going to go through some of the names right now because these are people everybody knows. There's Banting and Best. All they did was come up with insulin.
Yes, and this is 1922. They're on the roof of the medical building. That was the dog that they used to extract the insulin. And it's a great story, and it helped establish the reputation of the university. But I accept Michael Bliss's interpretation in the book that in fact it held back research at the University of Toronto. Banting and Best, Banting in particular, was getting huge amounts of funds, and he wasn't, in fact, a very good scientist. Still,
He's got a Nobel Prize and we don't.
That's true. That's true.
Here's another superstar. Robertson Davies, look at that face. Founding master at Massey College. Today, of course, recognized as a superstar. Now, at the time this picture was taken, did people think of him as being the superstar that he is today?
Not to the same extent. They were taking some risk that he wouldn't become a superstar. He hadn't written his famous novels, Fifth Business. They were written while he was master. But he established Massey College as an important intellectual hub at the university, and other masters have continued that. I don't know if you get to Massey very often. It's a very, I'm a senior fellow there, and it's a very important part of the University of Toronto. It's the first graduate residence just for graduate students, so it attracts some excellent students.
It's also the place, I'm told, where when you lose an election, former politicians go to hang out for a while and teach and get their feet back under them again.
Yes.
Many have done that. Bob Ray, Preston Manning, and the list goes on.
That's right. So it's a very fine institution.
Now, on the issue of politics, let's continue, because there have been some prime ministers and premiers who came out of the U of T. William Lyon Mackenzie King was the longest-serving PM ever, and he went to U of T.
Right.
And that man on the right is Lester Pearson, and he went to U of T. Was there any indication, and we should say that's Northrop Frye in the middle there as well, was there any indication that you know of that when these guys were students at the University of Toronto that they were somehow destined for greatness?
No. In the case of Billy King, that's what they called him, Billy King, he was an average student. He was famous, though, at the time because he led a student strike because the students didn't like the appointment of the professor of history. They thought it was nepotism, which it probably was. So he made a name for himself there, and he did go on to Chicago and get a doctorate. But there were others that were involved in that strike that you would have predicted would have gone on to do better things. Pearson was a very good student, and he was actually on the faculty for many years in the 1920s, and then applied for foreign service, and his career took off after that.
I think Bill Davis and Bob Ray and David Peterson all went to U of T as well, former premiers.
That's right. Here's a question for you. Because I know you're interested in premiers and have a book on them. What buildings at the University of Toronto are named after premiers?
Oh, that's a good one. Well, first off the top of my head is John Robarts. He's got the library named after him.
That's one.
Is there more than that? Wait a second.
Here's another one that was recently named. William Davis has the major building
in Mississauga. That's right.
And many people think Whitney Hall is after the Premier Whitney.
But it's not.
It's not.
Okay.
It's his brother. And when I was my first year in law school, I was in Baldwin House. But I then discovered it was renamed Cumberland House. Now, Baldwin, in fact, deserves to have something named after him because the present University of Toronto was really his doing.
There's one building, I was there the other day, on St. George, east side, sort of kitty corner to the Robarts Library, where our first Prime Minister, Sir John A. Macdonald, and our longest serving Premier of Ontario ever, Oliver Mowat, both lived.
Both lived.
Not at the same time,
right.
But I got to tell you, I'll put the pitch in right now. The place is falling apart. It looks like hell. And you guys really ought to, not you guys, but somebody should talk to somebody and get the place fixed up because it's an historic site and right now it's really underutilized.
It'll be fixed by the 3rd edition of the book.
Good, let's hope so. Here's another superstar. Everybody remembers this guy. They had the 100th anniversary of his birth a couple of years ago, Marshall McLuhan. And again, he has become legendary posthumously. But when he was teaching at the university, did people see him as this amazing guru?
I think they did. An odd duck, they would have said. But don't forget, he was in that Woody Allen movie.
Yes, Annie Hall.
Annie Hall. He was in line to see the movie. I actually came prepared with only one quote that I will put to you, because
Sure.
I thought you would say something about Fry and McLuhan. Fry has there's a statue of him at Victoria College, and the McLuhan is at St. Mike's, and there's a McLuhan building, and they're going to name a street after him. And I speculate in the new introduction what they thought of each other, because they were here at the same time.
Right.
And I say, what did he and Fry, two of the university's giants, think of each other? Then I say, there's a passage in one of Fry's published notebooks, volume 13 of the collected works, University of Toronto Press, that gives a clue where Fry writes. Now, think of this. Television is like a telescope, a new method of perception, which tells us more, but also makes what it sees look cold, dead, and inconceivably remote.
That's him. Yeah.
Global village, my ass. It's a great quote.
Nice. Very nice.
Now, it may be that Fry didn't have a big flat screen television, but...
Let's do one more picture here, and this is Claude Bissell, the U of T president. His office, 1970, the students are having a sit-in. They're upset about something. And it just raised a question for me about, of course we remember the huge incidents in the United States on campuses during the 70s, anti-Vietnam demonstrations, Kent State obviously. How much of a hotbed of radicalism was the U of T campus ever?
Well, it wasn't like Berkeley, but it was pretty close. There were sit-ins, there were protests. That one was in Simcoe Hall in the Senate chamber. It led to a number of important changes at the university. That's an important turning point in the university, because it led to a different governing structure. You'll be interested in this, because that governing structure was the governing council system. Instead of having a board of governors and a senate, as almost all universities in North America have, it has one institution, a governing council with all the estates there.
Unicameral.
Unicameral. And your mother was the second chair of it, and a very good chair of the governing council. And one of the reasons, I speculate, that the University of Toronto has been able to rise in the ratings and become a stronger institution worldwide is because the debates take place amongst the various estates. And
when you say estates, you mean the professors, the
students, the administrative staff,
political appointees,
and so when issues arise, and they constantly arise, instead of the protest being against the Board of Governors or the Senate, you have to blame.
Everybody's in the room.
Everyone is in the room, and we've had. You can think of a number of potential issues, whether it's artificial grass on the back campus or things like that, but they were handled through the governing council process. So.
Okay, let's finish up with these. We're going to do some snappers here, okay? I'm going to give you some questions, and you give me like first instant response and maybe 10 seconds on why. Best president the university ever had. Let's take David Naylor out of the mix, because he's the president who's had the job and is just leaving the job right now. In the whole history of the University of Toronto, who was the best president?
I'll make that a three-way tie. Faulkner, Robert Faulkner. He gets a one-building Faulkner Hall at the law school. Claude Bissell, he gets just a wing of the Robarts Library. I don't know, you wrote the book on Robarts. It could have been the Claude Bissell Library, but it was
not if Bill Davis was premier. That wasn't going to happen, but anyway.
And Rob Pritchard. Rob Pritchard was a very strong president, and it enabled the university to move forward in the last decade, the many things that he and his very talented vice presidents were able to do.
Best decision the university, writ large, ever made?
Not to build what was later called Skydome, the Rogers Center, at Varsity Stadium.
That was one of the proposed sites, wasn't it?
Yes, the people wanted it, and it was a big fight in the university, and the university turned it down.
Worst decision the university ever made?
Well, some of the hiring that they didn't make, but they've recovered from in the 19th century. There was, might be considered, they had the chance to get some top scientists, but because the government was making the appointments, they chose safe appointments. For example, the professor of botany, they could have had a top person. They got the premier's brother, you know.
Got it.
Who was basically a high school teacher. Now, we recovered from it because people like Daniel Wilson had very high standards, but I don't know if that's really the worst decision. It was the first one that came.
Well, put it this way. Did the university not hire people because of their race or religion at various times over the years?
Of course, and there's a lot of material in the history on that. The first tenured professor at the University of Toronto was Jacob Finkelman, a professor of law who was hired in 1931. Subsequently, Bora Laskin and others were hired. There were quotas against Jewish Jewish students in the Faculty of Medicine. Marks had to be higher for those students until 1959. It's hard to believe it lasted that long. The university is a far different institution now in terms of gender, race, religion, ethnicity, visible minorities. The 40% of the University of Toronto might be visible minorities. And this is on the 3 campuses.
Downtown Scarborough, Mississauga.
Scarborough and Mississauga. And just before you finish your question, that is the important story now, the growth in Scarborough and Mississauga. When this book came out, there were 5,000 students on each of those campuses. Today, there are 12,000. It's going to go up to 15, and probably by 2030 as your date, we like 2027 because it's the 200th anniversary. It'll be, there may be 20,000 students. The main campus, what we call the St. George campus, will tend to be more of a graduate student center. I wouldn't be surprised if half the students in engineering, to give one example, are graduate students, as in MIT and Caltech.
One last question. Of the hundreds of thousands of students who've gone to U of T over the many, many years it's been around, which student do you think has achieved the most post-university career success?
I'll answer that by saying those watching or listening should read the book and judge for themselves.
Make their own mind up. Martin Friedland, great pleasure having you in today. The University of Toronto, A History, second edition, just out. Thanks so much for your time.
It was a pleasure.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.